thanks to all of you for being here this evening. The text we're about to release, that we are here to release and to debate, is the product of collective deliberations held over a period of around 14 months, involving a group of citizens diverse in their backgrounds, interests, and areas of expertise, but all united by a common concern and sense of urgency. Simply put, that concern rests in a recognition that our nation is at a period of critical choices concerning our internal development and our advance in the world. Although we will live with the effects of these choices for many years, we are making too many of them, we felt, in ad hoc ways, without reference to any agreed strategic principles. NonAlignment 2.0 is an attempt to identify basic principles that might guide India's foreign and strategic policy over the next decade and beyond. The views it sets out are rooted in our conviction, that India's domestic development will hinge greatly on how effectively we manage our global opportunities. Our intention is not to prescribe specific policies. That remains the prerogative of government. Rather, it's to encourage debate that brings us closer to a strategic consensus and unified approach to our international engagements, one capable of commanding cross-party support, as well as support across government and the services, the corporate world, civil society, and the media. Such strategic consensus is vital, we felt, if India is successfully to pursue its national development goals in difficult global circumstances. The purpose of our document is threefold: to lay out the opportunities that India enjoys in the international sphere, to identify the challenges it is likely to confront, and to define the broad approach that India should adopt as it works to enhance its strategic autonomy in global circumstances that will remain volatile and uncertain for some time to come. Before I highlight some of the main arguments, let me, on behalf of all the authors, acknowledge some debts. For a start, we owe thanks to each fellow member of the group for devoting their time to conversations that have been open, critical, and rigorous. We're also grateful to several institutions for facilitating our meetings, in particular the NDC in Delhi and DSSC in Wellington, and the Center for Policy Research here also in Delhi, who have been responsible for producing the printed version of our document. We're also all grateful to our own institutions for supporting our involvement in the project, but let me stress that we each speak as individual citizens and not on behalf of our institutions. Now to the arguments. I'll not try to summarize a dense text in my limited time. Our hope is that you will read that for yourselves. A first premise of our document is that India's social and economic progress is inextricably entwined with how we manage our international environment, with whether or not we can seize global opportunities and turn them to our developmental goals. This will become increasingly true as we engage more deeply with the global trade in goods, labor, technology, and ideas. India now has more interests anchored in different parts of the world than ever. In analytic terms, the separation between domestic and foreign policy is therefore a purely formal one. Instead of categorizing choices as either domestic or international, we must consider the global interconnections and trade-offs and continually evaluate short-term domestic policy choices in terms of long-term strategic goals. We begin as well with the belief that there must be long-range continuity in the practice of our international policy. Hence our title, NonAlignment 2.0. By that, we refer not to an old ideology or a movement, but to enduring principles. Three in particular: that our actions should not be governed by ideas and goals set elsewhere, that we expand our scope for strategic autonomy, and that we use our accruing national power to build a more just and equitable global order. These have been defining principles of India's international policy ever since the inception of the Republic. The world has changed drastically since then, but these values remain at the heart of India's global engagements. The challenge now is to renovate those values for the 21st century. That means recognizing the changed nature of the international domain and what it implies for the nature of power today. The great binaries that once structured the international arena between ideological rivals who shun one another or between rich and poor nations have lost valence. Power is increasingly diffused and complex in its nature. Alongside superpowers like the US and China, the world will contain more hubs and centers of power than ever before. Equally, when it comes to our economic interests, these now straddle developing and developed countries. The strategic perspective set out in our document is defined by two axes, and I will begin with the regional one, the Asian theater. It's our main sphere of action, our natural home, as well as being the globe's economic dynamo. But the region lacks any settled institutional architecture of interstate relations or economic governance. This gives us considerable opportunities to define our place. We shall have to do so, however, amidst the reality of great power competition, as well as ideological rivalry between Asia's competing developmental models. Within Asia, China is by some way our most sensitive strategic challenge. Given the asymmetries between our respective capabilities and influence, it will take considerable skill to reconcile our desire to cooperate with the realities of competition. From a strategic viewpoint, we'll need to work to rebalance our relationship with China in at least two dimensions, security-related and economic. While securing our mountain borders remains important, we need to reorient our security perspective towards the Indian Ocean region in order to maximize advantages we have there. Economically, our trade is skewed. We increasingly import high-value goods but add little value to the bulk of our exports to China. Given China's interest in India as a major market for its infrastructure capacities and otherwise, we need to leverage this in intelligent ways. In South Asia as a whole, we have to work harder to build a common platform. While India is clearly the major economic power in the region, we have failed to parlay this into the political influence and convergence necessary for greater economic integration. Deepening South Asia's economic integration serves the interests of all its members. We need to foreground this as a clear strategic goal and make every effort, including unilateral concessions where necessary, to secure greater economic integration. This is our best counter to the ambitions of other great powers, particularly China, who wish to expand their influence in this region. Pakistan, of course, is a major stumbling block to such integration. Here we need to pursue simultaneously a variety of policies. We should at all times maintain diplomatic and political engagement aimed at bringing some normalcy to the relationship, while continuing to cope with present and future threats that may emanate from Pakistan-controlled territories. Our policy initiatives need to offer Pakistan real options to join in the region's economic growth, even as we stay prepared for negative contingencies should the present equilibrium of instability tip the wrong way. Finally, we have the uncertain scenario of West Asia, where we have major interests at stake. This enjoins us to develop a more fine-grained set of guiding principles for engagement. This is particularly true as Western powers become less dependent on the region for energy needs, while still using the area as a testing ground for democracy building and the use of force. We need to be more nimble in our judgments about the legitimacy of regimes. We need to be more nimble in our judgments when the legitimacy of regimes is contested, and to develop more sophisticated arguments about the use of force. Most of all, we will need to wean ourselves off our energy dependency on the region. The second strategic axis we consider in the document, after the regional one, is the broader functional one. In terms of our engagement with the international order, there are two aspects that I'll highlight here, although there are several more in the document itself. First is our growing integration with the global economy, which is vital to our prosperity. As developed economies lose out in the current global economic readjustment, they will likely become more protectionist. India will therefore have to shoulder the role of advocate for economic openness. While it may be tempting to enter into bilateral free trade agreements, we must continue to build multilateral regimes. This is to our benefit not least because it helps to embed China in a rule-bound, negotiated international system. In fact, the very open-endedness and uncertainty of the global economy provides us with an opportunity. We need to take a more strategic view of our financial sector and to encourage its global orientation, and we need to engage more actively in Asian and global discussion about monetary systems and currency regimes. A less fragmented, more unified view of our international economic engagements will be one that traces clear linkages back into the domestic economy and electoral considerations. We need to be able to leverage bargains from one sector to the other, to others, but that requires much greater coordination between the various responsible institutions, the MEA, the Ministries of Finance and Commerce, the RBI, and so on, as well as political will to confront veto points in our own politics. We need also to engage more actively with the international institutions of economic governance in all their tentativeness and proliferation. In our partnerships, complexity rather than singularity should be the operative mode, in a world where the old alliance systems are breaking apart. India holds perhaps a unique status precisely because of its complex identity, which enables it to straddle many worlds and make many connections. In terms of constitutional vision, India is perhaps the most Western and liberal amongst the non-Western powers. But we are rooted in Asia. As a poor and developing country, we have also an enormous global footprint. We have the potential to become a technological powerhouse, yet we remain an informal economy. We are committed to democratic principles and are convinced that robust democracies are better guarantees of security, yet we do not promote democracy or see it as an ideological concept that polarizes states. It follows that there are few natural groupings, whether defined by political vision, economic profile or interests, or geopolitical security challenges, into which India easily fits, let alone other individual states it should bind itself to. This diverse identity and multiplicity of interests is our great strategic asset, for it means that India can be a unique bridge between different interests and worlds. I turn now to hard power. Hard power will, of course, remain important. But at present, our land borders, subject to several unresolved disputes, offer little scope to project strategic military power. There is only one direction open to us to do so, towards the Indian Ocean. The development of military power must therefore be reoriented from a continental to a maritime direction in order to take advantage of our peninsular location. India's strategic objective must be to emerge as a maritime power. In tandem with maritime reorientation, we need to revise military doctrines. The fact that all conventional military operations involving Pakistan or China will be conducted under the nuclear overhang means that there are severe constraints on achieving political objectives through conventional war. The risks involved in escalation are real. The presence of nuclear weapons constricts the traditional utility of military force and calls for redefinition of our notions of victory. The significant implication is that the long-standing objective of our military doctrine in relation to Pakistan, the capture of significant swathes of territory, is no longer valid. Instead, we need to develop a hard power strategy with a wider spectrum of options. This will demand a redeployment of resources as well as investment in technological capabilities. With China, our defensive doctrine also needs to be reworked, away from a mountain strike core towards a strategy of quid pro quo. Such a strategy would include the capacity to encourage insurgency in Chinese occupied territories, the integration of the frontier regions by rapidly improving communication infrastructure, and third, naval expansion that would enable us to dominate the Indian Ocean region.